Hello again, my painting students. Today I want to teach you everything I know about paintbrushes, their history, different types of brushes, how you can use them, how you hold them, how they're made. I'm talking everything you'd ever want to know about paintbrushes. Because for the rest of this class, that's going to be the tool you use. We might use a pencil now and then. We might use an eraser, a ruler, something else, but paintbrushes. We're going to be painters. All right. So buckle up. Let me share my screen with you and let's talk paintbrushes. All right. Paintbrushes. Just looking at this screen, look how many types there are. We've got someone painting with their mouth. We've got someone with hair tied to the end of a stick. Look at this gnarly paintbrush. What can you do with that? Look at all these different types. Let's get into it. All right. First of all, paintbrushes have been around forever. And although we don't have a lot of remaining paintbrushes from our, ancestors from say, 50,000 years ago, we can guess pretty much what they were using and what they had what kind of tools they could make. So check these out. I mean, these might have been what our cave person ancestors might have used. Although some have been found, there are some ancient paintbrushes that are in museums. At least that's what we think these were used for. And basically, they take things like hair or really fine things like, say, pine needles, and they're bound together with a stick and with some rope. And yeah, so people, tens of thousands of years ago were painting with homemade paintbrushes. It's really not that much different today. Today we take hair, we tie it to a stick, and we paint with it. So, cave paintings. Yes, they were likely done with paintbrushes, although some speculate that these hands, for example, which are in a cave, were done by people. It's kind of gross. You might have just had breakfast, but that they would take berries or roots or seeds and things that could really stain, a cave wall and chew them up with their saliva. And then once they were really finely ground, they could, spit them through a straw. Not like a straw you'd get at McDonald's, but we have natural straws like reeds, and you could blow through that straw around your hand and leave like an impression on a cave wall, kind of like the world's first airbrush, if you will. So that's kind of cool that we were discovering ways to paint way back then, whether it was with a brush or by blowing through a straw. But we knew, tens of thousands of years ago, how to make pigments, how to get them to stick. But ever increasingly, people got more and more creative and artistic, and they needed to find a way to be more precise. So, hair, that was really the way to go. So, we're fast forwarding now to 1525 or something, and you can see when you just look at the rendering of Peter Bruegel here, literally he had a bunch of hair tied with a string to, a stick or to a piece of wood. That's how it's still done today, hundreds of years later. Now we've refined the process, but essentially we still have a bunch of animal hair tied up to a stick and we move it around. That's what we do. So check out this video. I'm gonna let you watch this on your own time because I don't think it's going to play through this video. But go online, go to YouTube, and type in how paintbrushes are made. It's really pretty cool. Check it out. But we're not going to be able to do that at this moment. But there's different types. There are natural brushes, which are made obviously with naturally occurring types of hair or real hair from real animals. And we've gotten to a point now where we are pretty sophisticated and we can make fake hair. We can, take, synthetic fibers and we can make it kind of emulate or feel like real hair and put all those together and make a fake, fake paintbrush. Well, it's a real paintbrush, but made with fake hair, synthetic. And different types are good for different things. Often, say, synthetic bristles on a brush, which are made from like nylon, polyester, whatnot. Those are great for oil-based paints because oil-based paints tend to wreck things, so they hold up a little bit longer. Whereas I really like, a nice, like say, camel hair brush, real hair from a camel, for doing watercolor paints. So, artists have their own preferences, and if you decide to carry on in painting, you'll find your own preferences too. There's lots of different places we get natural hair from. Some say that the best hair comes from a Kolinsky sable. And I don't know if you can even picture a sable. They're like a little ferret or like a mongoose. They just have this hair that apparently is so soft. And if you get it wet, it comes to a point, which is nice when you want a brush that, has some good spring to it and always makes a nice point. So it's kind of the top of the line artist, preferred hair from an animal. Yeah, we actually use animal hair. And then there's red sable and bristle and squirrel and ox and goat and camel and then of course synthetic and there's others, but those are the main ones you'd get your hands on. Uh-oh, I just stopped. Let's go back to that. Give me 1 second here. There we go. I hit the wrong button. Let's move forward. All right, so here is a sable. Pretty darn cute. I feel really bad that these animals are killed for their hair. Yes, squirrels, which we have tons of in Michigan, their hair, especially that hair on their tails, is good for making brushes. I like camel hair, sometimes hog hair. Yeah, all these animals provide us hair. So it's sad that we do sometimes, you know, take these animals and use their hair. If you're against that, you just use synthetic and you don't have to worry about it. But some of these animals do the hair does certain things that is just great for painting. So good or bad, right or wrong, we do. Now let's talk about paintbrush types. Um, a round paintbrush has a round ferrule. That's this silver part here. It's called a ferrule. And so the end of it is round. If you were to look down on it, you would see it's round, and these obviously are flat. They've been crimped in a press so that all of the bristles, which is the hair, become flattened. And they have pros and cons. Why would you want a flat brush versus a round brush? A flat brush might be good for making lettering. A round brush might be good for doing fine details. And there's a filbert, which is kind of a hybrid. It looks flat here, but it's a rounded flat brush. You have a fan brush, which naturally looks like a fan, but what can that do for you? Angled brushes are also nice for lettering and things that have edges and that are have straight lines. The mop is for filling areas quickly, like when you just want to. Usually, you think of a mop, you're like cleaning up a big area. Well, with painting, you can lay down a lot of paint quick. It holds a lot of water or a lot of paint. A rigger is something called a liner brush. It makes very long, thin lines. Um, my understanding is people that used to paint ships a lot would want to paint those long lines that would be the ropes for the sails and things. So they would want a rigger brush. I use one of those all the time, especially for signing my name or fine details. These are the main brushes. There's a few others. Heck, there's even toothbrush. There's makeup brushes. There's all kinds of brushes. But these rounds, flats, brights, filberts, fans, angles, mops, and riggers, most common types. Those 8 right there. So I've given you most of these, and you'll be experimenting with them. I'm not going to give you all the answers right now, but finding out what they can do for you. So again, round, basically pointed tip. It's round on the ferrule, and it's it can be used just with the point, or you can press down hard on it, and you can get a thicker line. So it's a nice brush because you can go from a thick line to a thin line. So it's a very versatile type of brush. And the rigger we just talked about, great for fine details, a little spot in someone's eye, long, thin lines, hair, that kind of stuff, tree branches, signatures. One that has a square end or a flat brush is great for all kinds of stuff, but usually for straight edges. When you want to paint at the side of a building or something, a round brush or a mop or a fan brush, that's going to do you no good. But a flat brush can get those straight angles, so it's really nice. Filberts are great. I use filberts a lot when I'm working on a person's face, for example, because sometimes you don't want to keep switching brushes. You want something that can do something to get an edge, like the contour of someone's face, but maybe you want to do something round as well, like the little something on someone's nose. So it's a versatile brush as well. And there's different types of filberts. There's brights. I'm sorry. The bright is a little larger. Filbert a little more round. A fan, obviously, this is great for, gosh, drawing grass and reeds, and you can use it to make clouds. You guys will figure out what these are great for, but this one's really good for. I use it for water. I use it for pine trees. I'll be showing you some of these techniques. The angled brush, I'll be honest, I don't use this a lot, but I do now and then when I've got to get into a corner or if I'm making a certain letter, I find them handy. If I were doing lettering, for example, on the side of a truck, which some people do, they still hand paint letters. They often use an angular brush like this. So it's a lot like using a calligraphy pen that might be angled. And then you have your detail brushes, small, tiny brushes. The smaller the brush, the less the hairs, the finer the detail. I actually have some brushes that have like 5 hairs. And so I can be really detailed just to put a little sparkle in someone's eye or just draw something really tiny. So there's another video here, which we're not going to check out right now. But if you go to YouTube, you can see what these different brushes do. But to be honest, I'm going to skip past this right now. If you were in class, I would play it for you. But we're going to do this by learning by discovery. Okay, so you guys have 10 different types of brushes. We're just going to play. We're going to figure out what they can do and see kind of like how many different marks can these brushes make. That's our goal for today. So again, back to brush parts. There is the handle. So I might say, choke up on the handle. That means like get a little closer to the toe, the front of the brush. Or why are you holding on to the end of the handle? I've seen a lot of artists do that. They hold on to the end of the paintbrush when they paint. If you enjoy it that way, that's fine. Maybe it's a preference thing. Personally, I hold my paintbrush like a pencil. It's natural for me. Again, the ferrule, you can see the odd spelling here now. That's the metal parts. It might be copper like this, but more often than not, it's aluminum, something that is can be crimped, which is, you can see the crimp here. The crimp actually, it's a machine that presses it onto the wood so it doesn't slip off. So it's actually crimped or pressed in so it grabs the wood. You should know that this hair goes all the way back to about here, and it's usually tied with a string and glued together. So there's other things happening inside the ferrule. The toe is the very end of the paintbrush. So imagine if you stood this thing up on its end like this. This is the toe of the paintbrush. And then the heel is right back here. So sometimes I might say, just use the toe of the brush. Don't look at me funny. I might say the tip of the brush. But if I say press it down, don't just use the tip, use the heel so you can get more, bang for your buck. You can spread that paint quicker. And then, of course, the middle is called the belly. And yes, of course, you could call them hairs, but they're not always hairs. Sometimes they're synthetic. So we call them bristles. All right. So what you've got here at the bottom is that the opening of the round or the flat kind of determines the brush size. So let's take a closer look here. Whoa, hey. It pretty much starts with a 1, and then it can get even smaller than 1, which means really fine. I mean, this brush here, I've got a couple of those. It might have like 4 or 5 hairs. That's really tiny. Personally, I just start with like a 1. When you get these really tiny ones, I use them every now and then, but that means you're being super perfectionist and you're working super detailed. Good for you, but personally, I can do that with a 1 and feel happy. But each of these openings, think of it like millimeters. They open up a little bit more, 4, 6, 8, 10 millimeters, that kind of thing. It's not really millimeters because a 10 is not, a decimeter wide, but just one way to think about it. And then you can see the flats as well. The flat is measured, in this distance from here to here. So, maybe just memorize a couple of these right now. That 1, that's pretty small, and that's all you need for fine details. But like when you get up to a 10, yeah, that's just like kind of like a normal, good sized paintbrush. But if you get to a 20, that means you've got like a really big paintbrush in your hand. Personally, if I had just a 2, a 6, a 10, a 20, that's all I need. 4 paintbrushes. My personal favorite paintbrush is a round brush. I can do just about anything with it. Very versatile. So just take note of a few of the flats. Notice how the flats that are down here, they kind of taper. In other words, they're larger where the crimp is or the flat area is, and then it kind of angles. Whereas a good, full-size flat brush should be square up here. But it's just odd. The smaller you get, the more they tend to angle. All right. So when you're buying a paintbrush, or I've given you some paintbrushes, I've given you some good ones and some that are used, to be honest. But what are you looking for if you want to buy a paintbrush? First of all, they should have good elasticity, or what some folks call spring. So when you pull back on the bristles, they pop right back into place. You don't want to pull on the hairs and the hairs kind of stay or get all gnarled up and kind of weird looking. They should always go back to the position, their original brush position. After you're painting, after you're cleaning, that's a good brush. Ones that can control paint flow really well. Sometimes you start painting and it gets dry really quick, or there's just all kinds of issues, or they're kind of split or what's called splayed. You want a brush that's just consistent, that you know what it's going to do. The hairs are evenly distributed. They're cut just the right way. They form a nice point if it's around. And that's the last point. They should form a nice paint or have a nice edge. The cheaper brushes will have loose hairs that come out. And then when you're painting and you want to get a nice edge, you end up with these extra, you can see the extra hairs making extra lines. So you get what you pay for, long story short. Buy a good brush, spend the extra money, you'll be happy you did. So one thing about storage of brushes, artist brushes, they can be expensive. I bought some $30 brushes before. When I'm done, I make sure that I stand them up, okay? I don't want them, you could lay them flat too, but you don't ever want them going downward where the bristles are going down, like in the bottom of a cup, because instead of the point of the brush being nice, it'll get all gnarly. And next time you go to use it, your brush will be all splayed. Splayed means all jacked up, all gnarly, nasty. You can't paint with that. Now, what I do is, first of all, just before I talk to you about how I clean a brush, first of all, never let paint dry in the brush, whether it's acrylic, oils, watercolor, tempera. Always clean your brushes when you're done. It will ruin a lot of paint, like acrylics, oils. It just ruins the brush. Don't leave them soaking for too long, okay? It's okay to leave, like say, watercolor brushes in water for 10, 20 minutes. It's not going to kill it, but don't do it overnight. Especially if it's like a wood handle that's been painted. It's just going to destroy that paint's going to come off. It's going to chip. The wood's going to swell. Bristles are going to come out. I'm in the habit of cleaning my brushes and leaving them out of the paint because I buy expensive brushes. But if it's a plastic brush, you could leave it in for a little bit. Not going to kill you. Make sure that when you clean the brush, you don't just hold it under the water and let it sit there. Like you need to work the brush with your hand, or sometimes tap vigorously on the bottom of the sink with your brush so it really gets all the pigment and paint out. Use some soap if you need. And when you're done, try to form the brush back into a point and shape it so it looks really good. And then I set it in my cup so that it's facing up and it dries that way. So some people store them sideways, some store them upside down, right side up. Some say don't store them upright. It's in this slide, but I do, and I don't have any problem with it. I guess the theory is when you have water at the top and the water soaks down, it can get into the ferrule and make matters worse. So some people say store them upside down or store them at least sideways. That's up to you. I store mine upright and I haven't had any troubles. But again, don't ever store them downward. Okay, don't put them down. Last thing I want to say is when I clean my brush, I always take a little bit of hand soap or even bar soap, and I put that into the bristles and really form it to a real nice point, because I know next time I go to use the brush, I can just wash that soap out like really quick, but it still maintains that shape, which is nice. So there's a little pro tip for you. Add a little soap, form it just the way you want it, and next time you go to use it, it will be that same shape. Here are a few more types for you. These are made with different types of hair because folks in the East, say in Asia, might have access to different types of animals. So they use bamboo, whereas over here we might use pine. So if you see a brush that looks like this with bamboo, just know that it's from a different culture, different part of the world. So bamboo brushes, or sometimes they're called sumi brushes, are manufactured slightly different. And they have their own numbers. They're similar to ours. They range, but it's not in the same system as say ours in the West or in Europe. So, the numbers vary. But sumi brushes can do different things. They're similar to round brushes, but they're different shapes. So it's nice to have a couple sumi brushes in your collection too. They're just fun to have. And there's all types. There's watercolor brush pens. I've got a couple sets of these. I really got into them when I first got them, and now I kind of find them a pain because I have to open them up and fill them with water, or sometimes mix up the paint and ink and put it in the brush. And for me, it's just more work. I'd rather grab the right brush and just paint with it with my paint over here on the side. So, but they're fun. Some people enjoy those. But yes, I guess the beauty of these is you don't have to keep dipping in the water. You can just press or push on the little button or mechanism, and it's constantly dispensing water. So if you really get a handle on these and you like them, you might get your self a set of those. Let's talk about other kinds of brushes, ladies, or maybe some of you fellows. You know about makeup brushes. They're very similar. These look like mops and filberts and fans and angled ones. So those are not too dissimilar from what we're using in painting class. They are pretty expensive, but don't use your makeup brushes to paint, and don't put on makeup with your painting brushes. They're different types of bristles. They have, generally, these are much softer. They're not going to use hog hair to apply makeup to your face. These are really, really soft, and hence sometimes more expensive than actual paint brushes. But they're very similar to what we use in class. Still made with wood, you know, what you call it, bodies, metal ferrules, real animal hair. Beyond paintbrushes, there's other tools that artists might use to paint with. I mean, a house painter obviously uses rollers and things like that. You might do some faux finishing with sponges. You might use a stencil or foam brush. That's what those are with the flat end. There's palette knives. Some artists, like graffiti artists, use spray paint. I don't know if anyone knows what this is, but that's called a maul stick. That's something an artist might use to rest it against the canvas so that you could rest your arm on the stick and paint to steady your hand. So if you ever saw a painter use a stick, it's called a maul stick. Airbrushing, using air and a compressor. There's just tons. Painters themselves, like house painters, interior painters, they have their own types of brushes they like. Like I'm never going to use a 6-inch wall brush for a fine art painting. Like, I mean, I could, but I haven't. I guess unless I'm really working large. So even different professions are going to have different types of tools. If you're a interior designer or painter, you're going to use a sponge maybe to get a certain faux finish. Not so popular anymore, but well, if you lived in the 90s, a lot of people were going around with plastic wrap and with spray paint, with sponges to get all kinds of textures on their walls. It was a crazy time. So here you can see some folks painting with sponges. There's also foam brushes. I mean, it goes on and on. I think I'm maybe going a little too in depth because you guys aren't going to be using half of these, but understand that it's a big business. If you're interested, you could get into the brush making business or selling paintbrushes. They're never going to go out of style. They've been around for hundreds of years. And even though we try to keep reinventing them and making them slightly better or different, it goes back to a piece of wood, some hair tied up with a piece of metal. I doubt that they'll change in the next couple hundred years. I've also given you guys a toothbrush, which you can use to, whoops, gotta back up here. You can use that to what's called spritz. Kind of like airbrushing, but you get little spatters and spots and spritzes. So I'll show you how to use that. It's kind of fun. If you really want to get into painting, grab yourself a palette knife or two, and you can paint, like Bob Ross used these all the time to make mountains. We'll watch a video at some point of him doing that. But they're great for mixing paints, for spreading paints, for painting with. Some people do an entire painting with palette knives and never use a brush. There's all different shapes, all different types. So personally, again, this is not my thing. I use them now and then, mainly for mixing. When I use oil paints, I use them a lot. But I have no need for them for watercolors. But thicker paints, acrylics, if you like. So here's some paintings done with palette knives. You can see the texture. Some artists really love that. It's called impasto, which is Italian for paste. I mean, it's thick. Imagine painting with toothpaste. I mean, that's what it's like, but it's colored. So again, you can see spray paint, another way to go. Even on your computer, you can get different types of paint. You know, you can paint with a paintbrush or spray paint or a wider paintbrush. You can control it on your computer. So there's just so many ways to paint. Computers, brushes, I mean, it's nuts. Look at all these different paintbrushes you can get just for, well, now we're up to like CS6, I think, for Adobe Illustrator. By the way, if you really get a gnarly brush, what we call a splayed brush, don't throw those away. Yeah, you kind of wrecked the brush and it stinks. You might think this is garbage. I have a whole drawer full of splayed brushes. And sometimes I use those just for a certain technique. I want to make like some tall grass or a really gnarly bush or get a certain type of texture in a tree bark. And I'm like, oh, that's the perfect brush. And it's wrecked for most things, but it provides a certain texture you might want. So don't throw away those gnarly splayed brushes. They can be kind of handy at sometimes. But please do not cut your brush. Some people do this. They'll cut their brush to make a certain type of technique so they can achieve a certain technique, I should say. Please don't do that with my brushes. Buy your own brushes and you can do that. You can even buy brushes like this in a set, and that's great, but don't cut mine. Next is, how do you hold a paintbrush? The short answer is however you like. Okay. If you prefer to hold it on the end like this and paint, I can't do that. I don't find that steadying. I prefer to do it like this, one in the upper left, and just hold it how I normally would. I've seen people hold it like this, kind of underhand. Again, the point is there's no wrong way. I can't imagine painting like Matisse here, holding on to the end of my brush that's 6 feet long. But hey, it's Matisse. If he can do it, it's not wrong. Here you can see that maul stick being used, which is just, again, a stick you rest on the edge of your canvas to steady your hand. When you have a wet painting full of oil paint, you can't rest your hand on the canvas. And so it's frustrating. You're like, I don't want to mess it up. And it's helpful if you can steady your hand. That's what the maul stick is for. So if you've ever seen a painter do this, that's what they're doing. And I have some of these for you folks to use in class if you like. I've used them quite a few times. They're really a handy tool. But again, it goes back to, you can use whatever you want. If you have lost your arms, which I hope you guys haven't, but if you happen to, there are people that still paint with their mouths and some pretty impressive things. Artist Chuck Close, for example, he has a debilitating disease where, pardon me, he can't paint like he used to, but he puts on a glove, this contraption where he can insert a brush, and then he can just kind of hold his hand there and still paint. So I have to feel like I'd be the same way. If I lost a limb, or I'd still paint. I'd paint with my mouth. I'd paint with my toes. You'd work it out. So what is the right way to hold a paintbrush? Whatever works for you. Frida Kahlo did it in bed, and she would use a mirror sometimes to paint. So whatever you need to do to paint, that's up to you. So we talked way too much about paintbrushes, but the point is, today you're going to learn by discovering what each brush can do. You've got one that's just a pipette for getting water, but those other 9 brushes I've given you, I want you to find out what those brushes can do. So find out what type of lines they can make, find out what type of shapes they can make, find out what your preferences are. When I went through this presentation, I said a lot about, I like this, or I don't like that. I use this, I don't use that. Those are my preferences. And I've been painting a long time. Personally, I only need 5, 6, 7 really good brushes. That's all I need, because I know my preferences. I want you guys today to find out what you like. So I want you to fill an entire sketchbook page with just unique marks with these different paintbrushes. If it were me, I might divide it into sections and write down which brush you used, write down the brush number or the name, maybe even paint a picture of what the brush looks like. This is all for you. Yes, you're doing it for me for 50 points and it goes in your sketchbook, but it's for you guys to figure out to go through the rest of the semester what these things can do for you. Okay. So take your brushes, and I would say if you have any other brushes at home, like a big paintbrush, maybe one you might use to paint a wall, get all the brushes you can. Maybe even find a way to make your own paintbrush. Yes, I've done that. I've taken pine needles off of a tree, wrapped them up, and made my own brush before. Kind of cool. But find out what they can do. And this is way too simple of a test. Do not hand this in. I will not give you 50 points. I'm not looking for you to make 1 or 2 marks like this, like, okay, this does it. That's not the point. I'm talking really go crazy. Fill up 1 or 2 or 3 sketchbook pages. Photograph them, put them in your sketchbook. This is more what I'm looking for. Something like this or this. Really find out what they can do for you. The size, the angles, the lines, all the different things they can do. Put it in your sketchbook, get yourself 50 points. See ya.